It is with some irony that I post this video on starting to do philosophy much later than I had planned. The initial goal of getting a video out every month is already a shambolic failure, and as much as I'd like to blame this on not whipping my academic scriptwriter anywhere near hard enough, there is much to be said for the fact that until the massive YouTuber checks come flooding in for drawing stickmen, I'll be occupying much of my time earning enough bacon to bring home every day through more conventional means. Until then, on to business! How do we start to do philosophy? Let's stop for a moment and think about that sentence. How do we start to do philosophy? To start philosophy, you first have to know what it is, and last episode we saw that philosophy is about asking reflective questions, teasing out definitions, and thinking through possible answers. Since questions are so integral to philosophical thinking, just by asking the question, how do we start to do philosophy, we have already begun the philosophical process. But if philosophy begins with a question, how do we know whether we've asked the right question? If the answer is perspectivism or the absolute, and we are asking how does lettuce grow, clearly we are not going to get very far. Although philosophy isn't necessarily about getting the right answer per se, it is clear that not all questions are philosophical, and some are asked in such a way that they miss the point. Compare what is evil with why is Hitler evil? Although the latter sounds philosophical, it implicitly assumes what evil is. And this is the risk we run in asking philosophical questions, letting our preconceived notions and prejudices prevent us from asking the right questions. All questions in one way or another close down certain paths of inquiry in order to focus on others. Now you might then think we risk shutting off some answers prematurely if we ask the wrong questions to begin with. Do we not need some secure foundation in order to begin our philosophical investigations? This view is called foundationalism, the view that knowledge can only be derived from some prior foundational truth which justifies the rest of our reasonings. It's one of the most historically prominent views in epistemology. The philosopher Descartes is most commonly associated with foundationalism, famously attempting to prove all his beliefs from the famous proposition cognito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am. He began by questioning the truth of everything he had ever seen or believed, imagining the possibility of an evil demon feeding him false experiences and dreams. But during this line of reasoning, Descartes noted that although his body may be a dream, he was at the very least thinking, and no matter however else he was being deceived, he could at least know for certain that he was a thinking thing. Descartes thus inferred his own existence from his thoughts. Descartes then went on to infer the existence of a perfect God from his own notion of perfection, and that such a perfect being would not deceive him as an evil demon would. His senses could therefore reasonably be trusted. In all, Descartes attempted to build a philosophical system from the initial questioning of his experience's conformity to facts, and the secure foundation he derived from the clear and distinct thoughts in his mind. There are a number of logical problems with Descartes' reasoning. Given the scrutiny Descartes lays on the world as we know and perceive it, the inference "there is a thinking thing" does not necessarily follow from "there is thinking." And a perfect God's existence does not follow from the notion of perfection any more than the perfect ice cream sundae does. As another philosopher, Kant, would later argue, existence is not a predicate, meaning that adding existence to something does not change the idea of that thing. The idea of a $100 bill is exactly the same whether it exists or not. Since existence cannot be inherent in an idea, the existence of things cannot be proved simply from the thought of them alone. But to bring us back to the theme of philosophical beginnings, there is a wider problem with Descartes' philosophical methodology. Descartes starts with the question, what do I know, and only gives very limited answers about his own experience and the content of his ideas. Any mistakes in his foundational inquiry would carry up into the rest of his arguments. This leaves Descartes in the rather odd position of almost needing to know the most concrete answers in advance, before he can be sure he's asking the right questions. In short, he was very critical of foundations, very blasé about floors, walls, windows, stairs, etc. His error lies in being content with his initial inquiry to such an extent that he felt no need to ever return to either the question or the answer. If he had, he may have found himself continuously returning to the questions he asked, altering them and producing new answers that led to new questions. This critique of the foundationalist approach to philosophical beginnings is often referred to as anti-foundationalism. On this approach, there is no one secure starting point for philosophical process, only a series of open-minded and tentative questions, the explorations of which help to shape the very form of the question, and thus also the answers. Hegel and Nietzsche are two of the most prolific anti-foundationalist philosophers, both of which look to the process of historical development as the key to philosophical thought. It is clear that we, as philosophical thinkers, do not begin at the very start of time with the very first questions, but indeed are given questions and answers from our historical predecessors. Our questions have already been formed by previous answers, and our answers will help shape the future questions, and so on. Gillian Rose, an interpreter of both Hegel and Nietzsche, refers to this as always being in the broken middle between question and answer. The problem with anti-foundationalism, however, is that it seems susceptible to the problem of infinite regress. If an answer leads to another question, which leads to another answer, which leads to another question, and so on and so on and so on, is anything ever answered? Either there is no truth that we can get the line of reasoning off the ground with, or truth is never obtained in the end. This is difficult to answer, and the only way philosophers have countered it is by arguing for a specific conception of truth as process or approximate. We will look into this further in future episodes, but it is worth noting that instead of the infinite regress problem being definitive, it has itself led to the question what is truth, and so on to further inquiry. In a nutshell, it has led to further anti-foundationalist questioning. Although it may be added by anti-foundationalist philosophers, the debate continues. Next episode, we will continue our theme of the process of philosophical inquiry as we look at the problem of skepticism.